Shawn, on the Monday recap, we talked through a lot of the games from NFL Week 11, and we have only kind of been at the tip of the iceberg. This was a fantastic week of action, a wild week. We're going to try and get through as many of these games as we can. We're going to try and hit a few rapid-fire thoughts as well as we move through it. One that I think had a lot of things happen in it, but I also think can be pretty rapid-fire because it's like, yeah, this happens every single week. It's that the Detroit Lions are the best team in the NFL. It's that they are absolutely steamrolling teams. They went 52-6 this week. They are 9-1. I think I've seen, Shawn, that it's their best start to a season, being 9-1 after 10 games since, let me see if I can find the number, 1934. So they're doing historic things. This is a game, Shawn, where they have 7 possessions to start the game. They score 7 touchdowns. They had 656 total yards in this game, and they won it with incredible ease. We get everyone in on the act. We get 2 rushing touchdowns for David Montgomery. We get Jahmyr Gibbs in the end zone. Both of those guys looking good. We get 2 touchdowns for Amon Ra St Brown, and he also got 11 receptions for 161 yards to go along with that. We get Jameson Williams with 4 receptions for 124 and a touchdown. And Shawn, there's a lot of plays, again, we referenced on the first show where the player catches the ball and you think, where's the rest of the defense? Well, Jameson Williams catches the ball on his 64-yard touchdown. You can see the other defenders. Kind of looks like Jameson Williams may be in like second gear, but there was never a single doubt that he was getting to the end zone once he catches it. So, Shawn, the Lions are better than the Jaguars by a lot. And what notes have you here for us on the Lions other than they are very good?
Well, the Lions were definitely thinking that against that elite Chiefs defense, if Kansas City can hold Josh Allen out of the end zone, can win that game, can go to 10-0, then we can put Jared Goff back in the driver's seat as the MVP.
Well, Shawn,
Ben was all over this. I mean, he told me Sunday morning, we got to get Jameson Williams into these lineups. The Lions are not going to let him sit on that 5-interception game. They're going to humiliate the Jaguars. That is exactly what happened here. I mean, 412 yards. So I
didn't even mention Goff's numbers yet. 4 passing touchdowns.
We know that Tyreek Hill is a low 4.2 guy. We know that Xavier Worthy set the new combine record. The Lions, though, are this amazing balance of Jared Goff is right there with Brock Purdy as like the best caretaker types of QB in the NFL. You've got David Montgomery one of the things I think it's important to note about David Montgomery is that he is similar to Josh Jacobs and Najee Harris and those types of guys, but he is better. And I think that the Lions lose a lot with the number of plays they give him every game, but it's not as much as what the Packers lose when they're leaning into a Josh Jacobs. But still, you have those players. You have Amon Ra St Brown, who catches all 11 of his passes for 161 yards and 2. One of the things I've been writing about him is that, he's an absolute star, and he's a low end he's a mid to low wide receiver 1 for the next decade. And the problem that he has is that you have so many other weapons, and usually you're going to have a Sam Laporta. It makes it tough against legitimate NFL teams, which the Jaguars obviously are not, to get the kind of volume that is necessary to put up points. But the you catch all 11, 161, 2 touchdowns. He was open. They could have gotten him 20 catches for 300 yards if they had wanted. They're trying to get some of these other guys involved. But you have those pieces. And then Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams might be the 2 fastest men, especially with Tyreek Hill having the wrist injury. Now you say, how does the wrist injury make him slower? But anytime that a player is very clearly limited and in pain, you're just not going to be the same guy. You don't demonstrate the same type of electricity with the ball in their hands. Jahmyr Gibbs and Jameson Williams are probably the 2 fastest guys in the NFL. The touchdown that Williams has is one where you, as you mentioned, you see the defenders and you're like, I mean, against most players, these guys would have an angle or
There
they
was
would have
no
something
angle.
they could do. No,
There was no angle they could take.
no.
It didn't matter.
But the 54-yard reception, I mean, it's a little bit frustrating if you have Gibbs that you have 11 receptions for Amon Ra and only 1 for Gibbs, especially when he gets the 11 carries for 69 and a touchdown as a runner. He was involved in the game. You don't have to get 20 ops for the running backs. That's one of our points here. But his 54-yard reception, when he caught that ball and turns upfield, you're like, oh my goodness. I mean, this is something completely different. And somehow he got tackled by like a phantom swipe that hit him in just the wrong way. Like it was the pure, like literal shoelace tackle. That was too bad. You are looking forward to the Lions playing some of the good teams because they are so good and you want to see those matchups. This matchup, you're just like, what's the point? The Lions have humiliated all the bad teams. We know that they have had a lot more difficulty against the good teams. That's completely to be expected. But when you look through here and you know that they have put up 50 plus twice, they've put up 40 plus 2 additional times, but they've also played close games against the Texans, relatively close against your Packers, snuck one out against the Vikings, snuck one out against the Cardinals, snuck one out against the Rams. How are they going to look against the rest of this schedule? Now, they should blow out the Colts and the Bears the next 2 weeks, but then they have Packers, Bills, at the Bears. That might be tougher. 49ers, Vikings. They've got a more competitive schedule the rest of the way. Detroit's run to, the number 1 seed in the NFC. That will be fun to watch.
Yeah, it will be fun to watch. This game, though, just in terms of sheer domination, and they have been doing that in recent weeks. But the other thing, I'm sure people out there with the likes of Amon Ra St Brown in their fantasy lineup, Shawn, are going to be grateful for is the other thing they don't do is take their foot off the gas. In this game, like the game's out of control for a long time, but they're still getting their stars those opportunities. Which if one of them gets hurt, is obviously going to be looked at in a negative way. But I think that they're just showing that they're taking this seriously and they're going to continue to dominate moving forward.
Well, they go up 49-6 with 13:23 left. And they didn't play the entire fourth quarter still. So
you were hoping for 60? Shawn wants 60.
No, I'm just saying when Hendon Hooker comes in with 9:53, I mean, you've done your job in terms of the sportsmanship element. The Lions are better at some of the teams in what you just said, right? You come out of that game with the Packers and you haven't involved a lot of your good players. Not only are they frustrated because you almost lose, but also because it's not fun. When you play for Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell in this offense, playing football is fun. That makes a huge difference. Nobody plays harder or more dynamically than the Detroit Lions.
No, I would definitely agree with that. The Indianapolis Colts, Shawn, get a win against the New York Jets. The Jets now 3-8. This has been just a train wreck of a season for them. Rodgers struggled again. He does go 22 of 29, but it's just 184 yards. He has 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 3 sacks for 22 yards. I thought Richardson coming in here, Shawn, had some really nice plays, both rushing and passing. Garrett Wilson kind of had 8 targets, led the team in targets with just the 4 receptions for 18 yards on the Jets side. But Breece Hall, Shawn, looked fantastic in this one. He is 16 for 78 on the ground with a touchdown. He also has 7 targets, 7 receptions for 41 and a touchdown through the air. Josh Downs getting involved on the other side, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 84 and a touchdown for him. I thought that some of the passes here from Richardson, he does have 10 incompletions, but 20 of 30 for 272 and 1. And then he has 32 yards on the ground on 10 attempts and 2 short rushing touchdowns. Obviously a big fantasy day from that perspective with the rushing touchdowns added in. But from what we've seen, let's say earlier in the season before he was benched to this performance, I thought there was a lot of positives to be taken from this, particularly in terms of, I know deep passing was something we talked about with him, but he has a long of 31 to Josh Downs. He has a long of 39 to Alex Pierce. He has a 20-yard pass to Michael Pittman. He has a 33-yard pass to A.D. Mitchell. So I guess Richardson, Shawn, and then looking on the other side of Breece Hall are the two main candidates coming out of this one for their performances.
Yeah, well, Breece Hall, very exciting. The combination of workload in this one is why he should always be in the mix for a top 5 pick, arguably for the 101. You're hoping he's going to fully justify that at some years in the future. The contrast between Saquon Barkley and Breece Hall is simply that Barkley has to do it on exclusively explosive plays, where Breece Hall has the 7 targets in this game, catches all of them, most of the value actually comes from the 29-yard receiving touchdown. The other targets go for basically nothing, but those opportunities are extremely important. Hopefully the Jets lean into that down the stretch. I was hoping that they would win, just so we don't get a situation where somehow Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall get shut down. You could argue that with Garrett Wilson at this point, it doesn't matter that much either way. But the rest of season schedule for Hall is something that we've been promoting very consistently. It's something that shows up in the Zero RB universe every week. I think you have to maintain some optimism there. The story of this game is obviously Anthony Richardson. I thought it was an exciting performance from him in that it shows a path for him to be a successful NFL starter. One of the big contrasts this week for a couple of the guys who have this specific profile, you have Anthony Richardson, who's kind of the high-end version of it. You have Will Levis, who's sort of the low-end version of it. Richardson, you can see a path. Will Levis, even when he makes several, not just one, but several huge plays, the offense basically still doesn't move the ball. Your team is overmatched. You lose, and you're non-competitive, right? The Colts here, though, this was fun. I mean, it's been tough to score QB points this season if you don't have Lamar Jackson. We do have some of the guys who are fun and who are in that range. My teams that are doing well tend to have Jaden Daniels, Brock Purdy, Joe Burrow, and then many of them have Bo Nix as a backup, which in many cases he should be in. I gave up a lot of points by having Nix on the bench in some places this week. But immediately when he was benched and he was released in a lot of redraft leagues, I started adding Richardson onto all the teams. Situations where he was released in fantasy subsequent, and then you find out he's going to be the starter and he was still out there. I put in huge bids for him in the most recent week. I bring that up simply because most listeners are going to know that, we have discussed his weaknesses throughout the last year and a half, and those weaknesses are extreme. At the same time, the strengths that he has that made him the early pick, that made him someone who was so trendy in fantasy, those haven't, magically disappeared. I mean, one of the things that's so difficult and so interesting about Anthony Richardson is that you can see both things so glaringly, right? The insane athleticism, the big time arm talent, those things are completely the case. And the problems with accuracy are also completely the case. So, which thing is going to win out or be definitive in the long term? I don't think that we know. I love this coaching staff, even though you could argue they should never have benched him. And I love the weapons. Josh Downs, someone who on volume would be just a clear-cut wide receiver 1, right? Somebody who, like, on a weekly basis is going to be like wide receiver 8, wide receiver 9, wide receiver, like in that range. He drops down with Richardson and becomes extremely risky. But because of the types of targets you're now getting, he has this line where with 5 targets, he ends up with a 584 and 1, and you're still in great shape. Alec Pierce is a great fit with him. Michael Pittman, I don't think is as good a fit, but you have that 33-yard reception with Adonai Mitchell. That part is encouraging. You have Jonathan Taylor playing off of him. Now, against the Jets defense, that part of the game was not efficient or successful for them. Similar to what we talked about with Josh Jacobs, I think you could make the argument that there's too much Jonathan Taylor in this game. The problems were still there. He wasn't necessarily that accurate. There are a chance for picks. He has the 2 fumbles. The fumbles are a huge problem, right? The fumble that ends up getting recovered by the Jets turns the game, and the Jets probably should have won at that point. But even just with a little bit of time off, And with these weapons around him, with the coaching staff that is going to call plays that emphasize his strengths. And one of the things I liked about this game is there weren't as many plays, at least to my eye, where he's being asked to throw accurately underneath, something he just simply cannot do. Get the ball down the field of these guys, stretch the field, let them make plays. It's likely that we just saw his best fantasy performance the rest of the way. But the other thing that you love in this game, 10 for 32 on the ground when you're that athletic is not very impressive, but it was the intentionality of what they did in the running game, where they're simply saying, we kind of think he's a bust. We no longer need to treat him with kid gloves. If he goes out there and gets injured, who cares? We'll go back to Joe Flacco. If he's going to play, he's got to use his body. And they let him do that. He gets the 2 rushing touchdowns. Again, how effective this was for reality, maybe a little bit up in the air, but I do think it was effective. I do think it mattered. From fantasy, this is a gold mine. You have to have them asking, requiring, and emphasizing at the very least Anthony Richardson throwing his body into the mix. We got that effectively in this game.
Yeah, I think it was a step forward. It'll be interesting to see what it means for Taylor as well moving forward. I think Flacco might be a better situation for him just from, we're looking at the situation with Jalen Hurts, for example, and Saquon Barkley and those high value touches. I think there's going to be, like we've seen here, a lot of those go the way of Anthony Richardson. Shawn, we had a couple of other games and a lot of other games, I'll say, but to hit on here. So we're going to try and get through them as sharp as possible. But the Seahawks are 5-5. They get a division win against the 49ers, 20-17. They win it late. We get a Geno Smith rushing touchdown with, I think it was 12 seconds left to play. And that one, some very strong performances. It was nice to see JSN be a big factor again. He leads the team in targets, 11 targets. He has 10 receptions for 110 yards and some really strong play from him. Metcalf then with 9 targets, 7 receptions for 70. We get a rushing touchdown for Kenneth Walker. He's 14 for 54. It feels like, Shawn, every play that he rushes that he's having to do something spectacular, even almost to get back to the line of scrimmage behind this offensive line. He does have 2 for 5 in the air. Christian McCaffrey back end leading the backfield is 9 for 79. He gets 5 targets, 4 receptions for 27. Obviously, he's back in the lineup. Didn't look 100% like his old self here. Deebo Samuel, 7 targets, 4 for 22. We talked about it last week, the situation with him and the kicker and things like that. It doesn't just all seem to be going right. I felt in this game that they missed George Kittle, who was inactive in this one. We've talked a number of times about how good he has been this season. As a result, I thought Brock Purdy in the passing game, they have 159 yards. So they struggled a little bit from that perspective. I did think that Jauan Jennings looked fantastic. He has 11 targets, 10 receptions, 91 yards and a touchdown. That touchdown drive, Shawn, that he has to give them the lead towards the end of the game. A number of plays with the kind of fight and the effort that he shows on them. Spectacular plays coming from him. So he is kind of emerging into somebody who is going to be, I think, a consistent part of this team moving forward. Obviously, we don't have Ayuk, but he's outshining the likes of a Deebo Samuel at the moment in this offense. So what were some of your thoughts here on the Seahawks versus the 49ers?
The 49ers have to be more aggressive, right? You have this first half where they generally move the ball, and yet the initial drive, you have a 4th and 1, it's on your own side, you punt, you score a touchdown, you come back out, you throw a pick, you come back out, you run an 11-play drive where you only gain 26 yards, then you run into the half. So you more or less have dominated the first half, but you're only up 7-6. You come back out, you get that pick immediately, you're not able to do anything with it. You kick a field goal there to only go up 10-6. You come back with the 14-play, 70-yard touchdown drive. All through this time period, again, it's not that there's been anything egregiously wrong. But as you mentioned, I think they definitely missed George Kittle. You can see that when the Seahawks late have a drive where they do go for it, they get stopped on downs, they're trailing 17-13, and the 49ers are not able to do anything on that drive. which then allows for this final 11-play, 80-yard touchdown drive where Geno Smith scores at the very end. This game and this drive, I think, will be pivotal for the Seahawks in a variety of ways. You see Geno Smith overcome some of the mistakes that he's made. You see him overcome kind of the difficult first half of the season where they win the first two games. But from that point, they had then been 2-5, and some of the losses looked to be clearly on his shoulders. You have a drive here down the stretch where JSN is involved and catches 4 passes. I mean, he was going to have an okay day, but if the Seahawks don't get that stop at the end, if the 49ers are a little bit more aggressive, they pick up another first down, they run the clock out, then JSN is sitting on a 6-catch day that doesn't look like much of anything. The whole game matters. And your defense being able to go out there and get a stop, being able to prey on the passive nature of the opponent is huge. The Seahawks just seem like they wanted this game more, which is a problem for the 49ers. The 49ers spent a decent chunk of this game challenging plays that looked like they were probably right. Now, again, if you're a 49ers fan, you're going to look at it from the other direction. I certainly don't have any problem with that. But as opposed to challenging these plays, get out there and have your guys ready to compete. One of the things that was a little bit weird and frustrating, I think, if you have George Kittle, is that they kind of acted like throughout the week that he was okay, but they were going to be saving him for more important games. The 49ers are no lock to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if he's not healthy, you have to keep him out. Now, we have him on a lot of teams. That part is frustrating, Colm. One of the things that was nice this week, at least from my perspective, is that so many of our players hit that it wasn't a problem. Jerry Jeudy ended up going in as the flex guy in a lot of those. I mean, most of the teams are Bowers, Kittle teams. And so you have Bowers coming back in, he takes the tight end, you put Jerry in the flex, and suddenly you scored as many or more points as you could have possibly hoped for the other way around.
But that is a note that we didn't mention on the Monday show. A lot of tight end injuries and absences this week. You know, Kittle, Laporta, Trey McBride on a bye. A lot of names that were absent. So obviously we talked about how positive it was, to have Bowers in lineups, and then we touched a little bit on Taysom Hill's huge performance. But tight end this week was a lot more challenging than like say on Friday that it felt like it was going to be. There was a lot of teams that I have Kittle on that you're like jumping in to see what is on the waivers to try and work your way through.
Blair and I definitely got a 0 from Tanner Hudson when we were trying to overcome our Sam Laporta, George Kittle team. That was a devastating loss. I know that on one of my dynasty teams, I was looking at it Sunday morning, trying to get some starters in there. And it's like Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, George Kittle. That looks like a pretty decent tight end roster. So yeah, there were things like that came up. As we kind of mentioned on the first show of the week, this was one of those epic weeks where even the handful of down things, at least from a fantasy perspective, don't seem that bad. If you're a 49ers reality fan, this game was frustrating. And I think if you're a Christian McCaffrey fan, this game was frustrating. I've given several of the teams a really hard time this week for running the ball too much. I think the same thing has to be said for the 49ers. McCaffrey was fine. 19 for 79 is not catastrophic in any way, shape, or form. But the Seahawks realized they were not going to be able to move the ball with Kenneth Walker on the ground, and they did some other things. The 49ers have come out, and maybe Jordan Mason is just not healthy at all. But when you think about how good he was, and it's nothing like saying Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey are anywhere in the same universe as players. But when McCaffrey has had these injuries, when you're holding someone like a George Kittle out, and again, George Kittle may be definitely hurt, but they're acting like it's going to be no problem next week, which hopefully is the case, right? Regardless, I guess I don't understand 24 opportunities for Christian McCaffrey in this game. And if you're going to have 24 opportunities and George Kittle is out, it has to be a different split than 19-5. 19 rushing attempts for Christian McCaffrey is simply way too many. It doesn't make sense tactically. It's probably not good for the health of the athlete who is maybe the most important running back in the NFL.
And he's also coming off tendonitis in both his Achilles.
Yeah. So what are we doing here? The 49ers did not look well coached in this game, which is not something that you would ever think to say about a Kyle Shanahan team.
Yeah, they do lose for Kyle Shanahan. They do lose a lot of these one-score games. They fall on the wrong side of the result. So this was another one where they did come up short in a division match. They face off with the Packers this coming week. So that is a case of, Shawn, two offenses that you thought that shouldn't be running the ball as much and should be getting the ball to their star players in a different way. We'll see how they fare in week 11. Shawn, the Chargers get a win against the Bengals. And this game on Sunday Night Football was very interesting. A lot of high scoring points put up, and a game where it felt like it had just got completely away from the Bengals. They get their way back into it with 3 consecutive touchdowns in pretty quick order to get it back to 27-27. A couple of missed field goals in this game as well will be, just a challenge again. Teams, it felt like in the first couple of weeks, kickers couldn't miss no matter how far out they were kicking from, but in recent weeks then that has changed. But Joe Burrow, Shawn, has had back-to-back actual NFL losses and back-to-back pretty impressive performances. He has 3 passing touchdowns in this, 356 yards, does throw it 50 times for 28 completions. Chase Brown led the backfield, 22 carries, 86 yards on those. T. Higgins, Shawn, I thought looked fantastic again. He had 13 targets, 9 receptions, 148 and a touchdown. It's just so frustrating with Higgins in terms of, he's in, he's out, he's injured, he's, on the injury report, he's inactive, all the different ways. But, when you see him play at this level, it's just a shame that he can't be in there more frequently. And when you get him and Ja'Marr Chase opposite each other, that puts a lot of pressure. We talked about the Rams against the Patriots and their wide receivers. Very, very difficult to try and cover Higgins and Chase at the same time. So they combined for 26 targets. Chase is 7 for 75 and 2 touchdowns going his way. Chase Brown looked good as a receiver as well, 5 for 57 through the air from him. And I thought on particularly 2 of his receptions, Burrow extended plays, true sacks where it looked like he was about to shoot a good sack, breaks out of it, and nice passes to Brown on those. Look good as a receiver from there. On the other side, Shawn, Ladd McConkey gets 9 targets, 6 receptions, 123, and he was a big part of that late surge to kind of get the victory in this one. The victory was sealed by J.K. Dobbins, who has a 29-yard rushing touchdown. He ends up with 2 rushing touchdowns. The 29-yard touchdown, Shawn, kind of helps obviously it helps the box score, but he was 11 for 56 in total. So prior to that, it wasn't looking good with those opening 10 carries in terms of efficiency in the run game. Will Disley gets in the end zone. He's 4 for 80 and 6 targets going his way. 8 targets, though, Shawn, for Quentin Johnson. Gets in the end zone early, 2 for 48 throughout that. This could have been a huge day for him. A number of plays where either the defender, they're in contact, could have been massive plays. Either the defender tips it. There's one that kind of hits him on the shoulder pad helmet area, which would have been a walk-in touchdown. So it could have been a massive day for Quentin Johnson. And it's kind of hard to figure out exactly if it's fully going to click. He's obviously doing more than was happening last year, but still a couple of big question marks. But they, with those catches would turn around very, very quick. The other part I was going to say is Hassan Haskins had 2 carries in this, Shawn. They take him in pretty early in this one. They put him on the goal line. They give him 2 goal line carries. He gets stopped in both. Then they took in J.K. Dobbins, who hopped over the line for a touchdown. So I thought that was kind of strange play calling there from the Chargers' perspective of things. But Herbert again starts this one in terms of, I kind of mentioned this comment in a few shows. He finishes 17 of 36 for 297 and 2 touchdowns. But he's starting these games really well. He's 9 of 10 for 159 and 2 touchdowns after 10 passes. I don't know if it's the scripted plays. I don't know if it's how teams are adjusting to playing him. He looked pretty good as a rusher in this one as well. He has 5 for 65. But the kind of start and the end of the game splits has always been very different with him. But he has 13 touchdowns on the season, 1 interception. That interception came in week 2. So he's playing very, consistent from that perspective. I guess the question, Shawn, with all the Cincinnati stuff we can talk through, any thoughts on Will Disley? Is he becoming a thing in this offense? He has 6 targets the last 2 weeks, but is there something to look at as this offense progresses? Obviously, looks like it's going to be more Quentin Johnson, Ladd McConkey, but there's a lot of different ways this offense could go moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, Disley looks good. And the Chargers have been a little bit more aggressive than anticipated. Part of that, and you could see it in this game where they go to Gus Edwards, it's a little bit odd since Edwards was the preference early and was fine, right? I mean, 6 for 27 is fine. That you would end up so pass heavy and in a situation where Herbert finishes below 50% completions. Now, so much of the value is going to come in explosive plays, and the explosive plays were there, as you discussed. I mean, he looked good, and not just good as a passer, but the rushing from him is opening him back up to being a guy who would, in 2025, get picked in the top 6 maybe in Superflex dynasty startups. I don't think he's going to go that high, but when you think about the competence of the coaching staff and his dynamism, this was a game where in the first half, Justin Herbert looks like the best QB in the NFL. He looks like a guy who, and it's, the prototype where he is huge, he has a cannon, and because he has a cannon and can stretch you, then when you turn and you play man coverage, you do these things that don't allow the defense to keep an eye on him. It's like, now I'm just going to run for huge chunks. We have 30-yard gain in this game. So that part is exciting. We got the McConkey plays late to help when they were blowing the game. The Quentin Johnston stuff, as you mentioned, is a little bit crazy to be that snake bitten. The one that maybe that is the worst is they have him late and Herbert actually misses him. All the rest of those are barely tipped. Herbert misses him. That's unfortunate. They do have some dynamism in this offense as they get more talent, and probably specifically more talent at the running back position, despite the fact that J.K. Dobbins has been one of the best stories of the season. The Chargers are probably going to be... the AFC West is trending in the direction of being a super division, and that part will be fun. You're going to get
there's similarities in that and the NFC North with the Packers, the Lions, and the Vikings. I feel like there's some comparison between the two of them as we head towards the playoffs.
And I think that one of the interesting contrasts is that in the NFC North, you have the young guns. You have these young superstar coaches, Kevin O'Connell, Matt LaFleur, obviously Dan Campbell. Those guys contrasted with the AFC West, where you have
the old guard,
grizzled. Yeah, I mean, these coaches who have been good for decades, can they hold up in the modern NFL? Like, they don't do it exactly the same way that everybody else does it. But to have an Andy Reid, a Harbaugh, a Sean Payton, that part is fun. And the Broncos and the Chargers are building teams that are going to be a problem for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think you just have to absolutely love that as a football fan. But my favorite part about this game is that we had runs. Right? We talk about some of these games. You mentioned the thing that continues to the only thing that continues to really drag on me from this week is the fact that the Packers ran 43 plays and just how boring that ends up being from a football perspective. You had a game here where the Chargers go out and they 3 and out, but then touchdown. They're up 21-6, get an 11-play, 78-yard field goal drive before they have 24-6. And you're thinking, okay, the Chargers are going to be a real problem for the Bills and the Chiefs when it comes to who gets to go to the Super Bowl. And the Cincinnati Bengals need to fire everybody and start over. Anything that they had going on was done. I mean, we don't see these massive runs in NFL games anymore because there are so few possessions in NFL games. Now, again, the actual shift in that doesn't show in quite the way that it feels, but you come back out in the second half, and even though, again, the Chargers go immediately 3 and out and they go down 27-6, but then they go touchdown at the same time that the Chargers are going 3 and out, 6 and a fumble, 4 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. That's how you get back in games, right? You force 3 and outs. Now, a lot of that is that Justin Herbert couldn't complete any passes.
Yeah, I was going to say part of the reason I think we had so many plays here is there's 31 combined and completions. So you're stopping the clock a lot of the time. Whereas we're seeing all
throw some passes that aren't caught. Extend the game.
There was part of this game where I'm like, this game must be close to the end of the third quarter, and I'm like, oh, it's like that. I watched this as a game on Monday, so I'm able to skip through a lot of it, and it was nice. It was kind of refreshing to see. Obviously, the incompletions aren't great, but it kept the game stopped. Which we're seeing teams trying to shorten these games by just running players into a wall. I made a joke off air about a certain team where they might be on 2nd and 1, and they decide we're going to use all 3 downs to get that extra 2 yards.
Colm had some great content in between the 2 shows this week.
A little too explicit to share on air, I think.
Colm, the Cincinnati Bengals ran 35 more plays than your Green Bay Packers. You run 35 more plays. That's a lot of opportunity to get Ja'Marr Chase involved, to get T. Higgins involved, to get Chase Brown involved. Chase Brown had 22 carries in this game, and it's not a problem because they also threw 50 passes. You can give your running back 22 carries if you're throwing 50 passes. You got to get that balance correct. I mean, this is going to go down as the importance of this game, not as big as like Chiefs Bills. There are going to be other games that are a lot more important. There were some anticlimactic elements of this where Evan McPherson misses those 2 field goals that would have really put the Bengals in good position. And yet still, I mean, I think this could be the NFL's game of the year.
Yeah, I mentioned Burrow at the start, and it has to be pretty heartbreaking. They lose this one after the comeback and another big performance from him in that kind of second half run. But they lose last week by a point to the Ravens. They've had a couple of really crushing losses throughout the course of the season. They lost to the Ravens by 3 points earlier in the year. A couple of really close ones that they've come up short. They lost to the Chiefs by a point. So they've really competed with some of the higher end teams in the NFL, but just came up short. And then, Shawn, I mentioned the 9 of 10 start for Herbert. And again, I thought he looked good. I thought he looked really good in that first half, but he goes 8 for 26 after that. And most of that coming on that final drive. So if they can just figure out what's happening in that portion of the game, maybe they're on to something as they move forward here. Shawn, the Chiefs, who you mentioned there, lose to the Buffalo Bills 30-21. They are now 9-1 on the season. The Buffalo Bills 9-2. Obviously, this could have impact as we head towards the playoffs in terms of the seeding. We get a couple of one pretty bad interception from Patrick Mahomes, but he's 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. We get 1 touchdown, 1 interception from Josh Allen. I thought Allen had a pretty good game. Just 9 rush attempts for James Cook. They kind of went away a little bit from the run in terms of the running backs in the game, Shawn. 19 combined total carries to Josh Allen's 12. They didn't do a huge amount on the ground with it either. Amari Cooper's 2 for 55 on 3 targets. The player who had a really strong play for his touchdown, Curtis Samuel, 6 targets, 5 for 58 and a touchdown. 12 targets for Khalil Shakir, 8 for 70 and no score, but no, obviously a strong performance from him. I mentioned some of the tight ends that missed this week. I didn't mention at that time Dalton Kincaid was also inactive, so he was out. James Cook gets 6 targets, 5 receptions for 7 yards in the air there. Shawn, Xavier Worthy, we were talking about this a little bit before we started, starts off this game and it's very, very strong in terms of the usage that they have. He has 5 targets in the whole game, but he has 4 for 61 and a touchdown pretty early in this one. Then there is a deep play to the left-hand side. For some reason, he kind of drags his foot before he catches it, and then he only gets 1 foot down. Would have been a deep play about 30 yards. That obviously doesn't happen. And I don't know if it was a case that the team punished him after this or not, but he just became pretty much null and void in the offense after that particular moment. He did have 1 rush as well for 7 yards, but they could not cover him in that first quarter, and it looked like, oh, we're off for a huge day here for Xavier Worthy. But from that point forward, they kind of stepped back. But it was a really dispersed passing game in terms of people getting targets throughout this offense. We have a lot of people getting 1 target. We have 2 targets to Justin Watson, Peyton Hendershot getting 1, Juju Smith-Schuster getting 1. We have 4 targets to Travis Kelce, 2 for 8 yards, 4 targets to Samaje Perine, 2 for 8 yards. A lot of inefficient play from that perspective for the Chiefs. They still lose in a relatively close game. No fumbles for either team. But Shawn, what was your thoughts coming out of this, both reality and fantasy-wise? There was no huge fireworks. It felt like it was going to be from Worthy, but a very, I think, kind of, you called it like a tactical battle from these 2 particular teams.
Yeah, this was a very, very good game, despite some of the limits on the fantasy output for particular players. Now, both QBs end up scoring 2 touchdowns for Allen, 3 touchdowns for Mahomes. Both of these guys end up with not great per attempt averages, and yet you felt like they were carrying their teams, which is what they should be doing. These teams are good. And if anything, I was more encouraged by this loss from the Chiefs, who had just been in the doldrums despite winning for a while. More encouraged by this loss than a lot of their victories. Right? This is a game at the Bills. It's a game where they consistently put Josh Allen in third down. And then on those third downs, Josh Allen is absolutely extraordinary. And that includes converting, I believe, 4 third and longs. He was 9 for 15 in this game on third down. That's extraordinary. He was absolutely fantastic. So I think you have to give him a lot of credit for the victory. The Bills weren't able to run the ball on the Chiefs. You would not have expected them to be able to run the ball. The Chiefs were able to mostly limit the variety of receivers here, but some of these guys did leak out. You have Curtis Samuel scoring the big play to put the game away, again, on, in that case, I believe, a 4th down. So you also get some 4th down conversions for Josh Allen. I don't think the Chiefs defense can play that much better than they played, and Allen still beat them. That says a lot more about Josh Allen than anything from the Chiefs' perspective. That part, just as a pure football fan, was really, really cool. On the Chiefs' side, you see them play more aggressively. You get 33 attempts from Mahomes to the only 14 carries for Kareem Hunt. That's more what they have to do. Xavier Worthy looked fantastic. You get the unfortunate play on the sideline. I mean, one of the things here is I think that if you can buy low on Xavier Worthy because you've had these missed big plays, then over the long term, you're going to be so excited that you have it. The other thing that we saw, this is something that Ben and I talked a lot about on Stealing Bananas with JSN after his big game. You saw the fire from Worthy in this game early on, which is one of the things you want to see. Somebody who's frustrated about his lack of contribution and is coming in, is ready to compete. It is unfortunate that he doesn't make the catch on the sideline, but you contrast what he's able to do with DeAndre Hopkins, who looks old. Hopkins has a potential key reception where he does go up with the hands. He makes the catch. He has the ball stripped from him in the battle to the ground. Again, that play says more about the Buffalo Bills defense than it says about the Chiefs offense. I think every time you look at a big play in this game, you're like, yeah, the Bills came through. The Bills are very, very good. That part, again, just cool from their perspective. You have a big game for Noah Gray, who scores the 2 touchdowns. The Bills are able to also limit Travis Kelce. Juju is back, doesn't do anything. We'll see where the Chiefs go. I think they have plenty of weapons. I thought they looked a lot better in this game. They have a schedule over the next month where they get to play the Panthers, the Raiders, and the Browns in there as a home game with the Chargers. Probably should go 4-0 in that stretch, although no NFL game is easy, and that Chargers game certainly won't be. They then have the Texans at home. The Texans, well, by the time that people are listening to this, will have played a Monday night game, which I think will give us a lot more information about them. Then their final 2 games at the Steelers, at the Broncos. Those games could be the ones where they have to go out and either clinch the AFC number 1 seed, or they end up blowing it to a team maybe like the Steelers. The Steelers really made a push this week as well to be taken seriously as a heavyweight. By contrast, the Bills have a lot of work to do in the next month, where they started that stretch with the Chiefs. Then they're going to have the 49ers. They're going to have the Rams. The Rams right now, probably one of the best teams in football. They're at the Lions. That 3-game stretch will be tough before they get a couple with the Patriots and the Jets. They should have the Patriots and the Jets overmatched, and yet these games at the end with Aaron Rodgers and the weapons he has, these games at the end with Drake May, you're not going to be able to take a Drake May game for granted, I don't believe. Both of these teams, a lot of season to go. The Bills had to win. The Chiefs, needed to win, because if you're going to get that third consecutive Super Bowl, man, it's just going to be so much easier with the bye. Right now, teams like the Bills, the Ravens, the Steelers, and then dark horses like the Broncos, the Chargers, the AFC is going to be very tough to get out. The Miami Dolphins, might be the best team in all of football. Will they make the playoffs? We don't necessarily know that, but you're not going to have an easy game in the playoffs unless maybe if you draw the AFC South competitor. So we'll see how that transpires over the next several months.
Last game, Shawn, to give a quick thought on, you mentioned the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. We didn't touch on them. This was 18-16 to the Steelers. I thought this game was pretty dreadful from both sides. I think overall, the last couple of times that the Steelers have faced the Ravens, they kind of have had Lamar Jackson's number. They struggled to move the ball in offense here for the Ravens. We had a Derrick Henry fumble as well. This was one where Henry wasn't as involved in as other previous games, even though it was a close contest where you could continue to try. I know we're trying to say teams don't run the ball, but they could have been more involved. But the Steelers, again, we're getting George Pickens 8 for 89 on 12 targets, but really outside of that, there's not a huge amount happening in this offense. Shawn, 6 field goals for the Steelers, get it done here. They do take in Justin Fields for a couple of plays. He's able to get 9 yards on both of those rushes, but it's important then, again, when you're down to short yardage, to take him back out and get Russell Wilson back in to see if you can, use up as many plays as possible to try and to get that 1 yard as we move forward. People may realize that that's who I was talking to Shawn off air about before the show today. But I think this is like a complete, they win, they're 8-2. This Russell Wilson, starting quarterback thing is a complete fabrication, in my opinion. Hit me with any thoughts you have here, other than a real struggle here for the Ravens on offense, and the Steelers edge it in a field goal fest. And we talked about missed kicks. This was one, Shawn. Justin Tucker misses 2 kicks in this one. Kickers are really struggling, as I mentioned a number of times. Even the best, and he has had a real struggle this season. I think before this game, he was around 74% on the year. Missed another 2 in this, so not good for him. But no such problems for the Steelers kicker as he knocks over all 6.
Chris Boswell was a big part of the big weekend. So we love Chris Boswell at RotoViz headquarters. A 20-play gap between the Steelers and the Ravens. You have a huge time of possession difference. The Ravens just couldn't get out of their own way. You have the 12 penalties for 80 yards. You have the 3 turnovers. When they do have some opportunities, it's not a lot of targets, but Lamar Jackson misses Deontay Johnson a couple of times. Mark Andrews gets wiped back out of this game. Interesting that Isaiah Likely is the player they could get open. We'll see how much of that is the case as the season progresses. In that first game against the Kansas City Chiefs, where you had a similar big split between run and pass that didn't necessarily seem like it made sense based on what the Ravens do. Well, the Ravens have been an electric passing team, so I don't think that you can necessarily criticize them for passing. That would be hypocritical in the context of our other comments this week. But Derrick Henry, outside of that fumble, it depends on how you look at it, because so much of his value does come in the 31-yard gain. But so tough, I think, for the Ravens to know that they can humiliate so many teams. But when you play the Chiefs, you get shut down. When you play the Steelers, you get shut down. The Ravens have now lost 4 games. And part of it here does go back to the defense. You think, well, they held them out of the end zone, but you're playing Russell Wilson, right? You got to force some additional mistakes. Now, Wilson does throw what should have cost the Steelers the game. This was a Will Levis quality pick, where I'm not sure I've ever seen a player with less pressure on them and less need to throw a pop-up pick do it here. This is going to go down. Well, it's not going to go down on the list of the all-time worst picks simply because the Steelers won. It was a bad pick. We get another incredible game from George Pickens. the rest of this offense was completely stopped in its tracks. But that's how good this defense is. And if Chris Boswell is going to be able to knock down everything, I mean, he's basically having the Brandon Albury season in 2024. That combination of defense and kicker, even against teams like the Baltimore Ravens, has been successful. It's easy to say because we want Justin Fields. I do think that Russell Wilson coming into this game had played well enough to win the starting job and to be the person that they need to have as the guy. I say that even as like a fist is like squeezing my heart because it's so gross to say. But this game does open back up the question of who should be the starter. They ran some plays for Justin Fields in this game. Well, a couple. And you're like, do that, right? And just explain to him that it's possible and recommended to just toss up very soft punt passes to George Pickens and let him do whatever. You don't have to show your arm off.
Maybe that's the one thing, though, that Fields can't do is those, like, I don't know, maybe he just can't get the trajectory right. But if his time on the sideline, he should realize that if he can just toss them up and let Pickens try and make an incredible catch, that maybe he will, get the starting job back at some point. But we'll see what happens.
Look like Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, probably. But that is going to do it for the second OT of the week. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening into this one. As always, hit that subscribe button, drop us a written review on your favorite podcast app. It does help us out a lot. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter @OverTomorrow, and my co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out his work up at RotoViz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.